Hello and welcome to Dialogue. Donald Trump has been sworn in, beginning his second term as he returns to the White House after 4 years, stating that American decline ends and the golden age of America begins right now. Trump has already signed a series of executive orders during the first day of his inauguration. How will Trump's second term be different from his first? How should we look at the first orders Trump has signed? And under his direction, where will he lead America? Join us for our discussion today, live from Beijing. I'm Xu Qinduo. Well, joining me today are Rina Shah, geopolitical advisor and 2016 RNC delegate, Adolfo Franco, attorney and Republican strategist, and Dr. Zhao Hai, director of international political studies from the National Institute for Global Strategy. Welcome to the show. Well, Rina, I will start with you. I want you to share with us your impression of President Trump's speech.
I'm definitely struck by his tone more than anything else. As he re-entered the White House, I think the energy is quite striking. He seems to be the very same person, as if time hasn't even touched him. In fact, there are many who've noted around Washington that his strength is also quite commendable, given he is the oldest president to be sworn in to the office of the United States presidency. I think what I heard from him yesterday was very much a continuation of his campaign rhetoric, those pledges he made on the campaign trail, and truly in going right for what he felt was an abysmal Biden record. He showed that an American president can be strong and lead from a place that most Republicans have just talked about for years, one that really focuses on the business community, but this time in a very unique way. The real presence of the billionaire class, if you will, from coast to coast. I think that was also striking because his tip of the hat to them in many ways showed that he wants to do things differently this time. But at the end of the day, he did go for a lot of what his base likes as well in dismantling, again, that Biden record that focused on social but also national security because of the great emphasis on immigration.
Well, Adolfo, dismantling Biden administration's record or operations, on his first day in the Oval Office, Trump signed an executive order revoking nearly 80 executive actions of President Biden, former President Biden. So I assume, people like you would welcome such a sweeping change.
Well, not only people like me, but the vast majority of the American people. President Trump right now has the highest approval rating of his entire political career, hovering around 60% approval of his positions and where people believe the country is going. I largely agree with the assessments that have made about the speech, so I won't repeat that. I think it's very clear that the president was a little more specific than is typically done at these types of inaugural events. It resembled more a State of the Union, a number of things I intend to do. But I do think not only the energy, which is an enormous contrast from the former president of the United States, but also the list of items, a to-do list. Ironically, what former Vice President Harris said she will come into the White House to do. He actually articulated those, and they do indeed reflect what he has been saying throughout the campaign. There wasn't anything there remarkably new, a thing here or there or a twist, but it was a list of items that he intends to do. He ran on those issues. He intends to implement those issues. And of course, not only did he rescind 80 executive orders, which, by the way, presidents often do rescind the former president's executive orders on the first day, or many of them, but he implemented a sweeping number yesterday. So it seemed to me two things. A president that has a record and knows what he's doing. He's done this for 4 years and is very much committed to moving the agenda forward as quickly as possible in the next 100 to 120 days, which will be critical to implement the critical aspects of this broad agenda.
Dr. Zhao Hai, I want to have also your opinion on the direction of how President Trump is going to lead the nation, and how different is him or not at all from his first term.
Well, I think the basic principle is the same. He's going to continue to push forward with his MAGA political agenda internally and externally. However, I think this time around, as our previous commentators noted, that there's a very strong sentiment and that by himself and also by the country, that he has the mandate of the country, and also he has a strong belief that himself is the savior of America. And also, there's a very strong energy to support him to push forward with his agenda, like he's signing over 40 new, executive orders, and also he's rescinding almost 80 previous presidential executive orders. However, I think from his speech, from China's perspective, there's still very obvious contradictions in his speech. On the one hand, you can see him continuing his MAGA calling, and also he's moving forward his political agenda. Particularly, he's calling for national unity, and he used the symbolism such as Dr. Martin Luther King's dream, and also he resembled JFK's call for not shooting for the moon, but this time around shooting for the Mars. That's good. However, many of his policies could be seen as divisive for the Americans, even though his approval rating is pretty high. However, there's still a very large number of Americans disapprove of his policies, particularly on immigration, on his attitudes towards LGBTQ movement within the United States, and also on many other economic and social policies. So moving forward, it's interesting to see exactly how he could push through all those agenda in a very short period of time without being challenged in court and also by other political interest groups in the United States.
Yes, there are already lawsuits against some of the orders anyway. But Rina, I want to have to take a look at something beyond America, of course, his basically withdrawal from the World Health Organization and also the Paris Agreement, not the first time. But how do you look at the possible potential impact on the U.S. as well as the global efforts on climate change?
Well, in terms of health first, for the World Health Organization membership, that's been criticized by Republicans for quite some time because of the COVID-19 pandemic, right? And the sense that when we've come out of it, we've been misled by certain folks. And these certain folks are people like Dr. Anthony Fauci, who was the preeminent face of the pandemic's leadership within the White House during Trump's time, but also during Biden's time. And that's why we saw in the last few hours of the Biden presidency that Dr. Fauci was granted a preemptive pardon by former President Biden. Now, what we know about the membership that we have in the World Health Organization is very little. The average Americans and most of us feel that why do we give in to these global memberships and pay into them perhaps even? And I'm not saying this particular one is as difficult as ones concerning national security, for example. But when you look at sort of the rhetoric from Republicans, they want to exact revenge on those that they feel have misled Americans and are really, for lack of a better word, duping us, telling us that they're a force for greater good when it doesn't seem we're getting anything out of it. So I am not at all surprised by not just the tone and tenor that Trump has taken about our place in the world, but I'm not surprised by the very rapid actions because it's been stated over the past number of weeks as we've seen a presidential transition with a rapid and unique pace like this one, that there will be consequences. And some of them are, frankly, we don't know the disastrous effects of, or we don't fully know the positive effects effects of. But he did tell us what he was going to do in clear language. And I think anybody that's surprised about this Trump administration's actions on the environment wasn't paying attention. The Paris Accords are something that they talked about for a long time. On the subject of climate, certainly we have the wildfires that really have devastated fellow Americans, Californians on the West Coast. And we continue to have climate events around the country that spark serious discussion about how America becomes energy independent and dominant. But right now, again, not at all surprised about President Trump's actions on the environment or on health.
Yeah, Adolfo, as Rina said, not surprised for a lot of people, of course, if you follow Donald Trump. But then, people look at other possible options, and with other like international organizations, including NATO, including the United Nations, for example. Is there any chance that the U.S. might withdraw from more international organizations like the United Nations?
Well, I don't think the U.S. is going to withdraw from all international organizations, but everything is on the table in terms of our participation and our demand that our voice and, more importantly, that contributions by other countries increase, since in many of these instances the U.S. is the principal payer or pays more, depending on what we're talking about. But on the World Health Organization, I agree. I was in the Bush administration, and we very much criticized WHO, the World Health Organization, and the United Nations. It used to be actually a larger issue in the United States than it is even today, the UN as a whole. And Republicans pledged for years, establishment Republicans, to withdraw from the United Nations. There was a lot of rhetoric in that regard. The difference is, as it was by an example, that we would move our embassy, as an example, in Israel from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem. For decades, for 40 years, I've been in Washington 40 years, presidents, Republicans and Democrats promised to do a number of these things. President Trump moved the embassy. Nobody thought he would do it in Israel. And President Trump withdrew from the WHO. No one thought he would do it. I think that was very important. Mm-hmm. With respect to climate, to be clear, and I'm glad we are on a Chinese network, China is building a carbon factory producing one a day. 365 a year, carbon. The problem is the U.S. or India, China, a number of other countries are playing by rules that the United States is not playing by. So I believe the United States and the Trump administration would actually engage in legitimate climate discussions with global partners and those that are not if the rules were being followed. It's a little bit like the World Trade Organization. You can have rules, but everybody has to abide by them. So the chief complaint with the Paris Accords is the following. So long as we are at a competitive disadvantage with major economies of the world, and smaller for that matter, we just won't play by a separate set of rules that puts the U.S. at a disadvantage. That is a key thing to understand. It's beyond the climate debate of how far to go, but what's being done and who's playing by the same rules. That is at the core, and that I think is an important message. When the U.S. withdraws from these organizations, I think we'll actually see serious movement on these issues because the major, or among the one of the major players in the world, is not engaged.
Mm-hmm. Zhao Hai, if you look at the U.S. moves by withdrawing from the two organizations, for example, agreements, one of them. So is it the U.S. playing by the rules, or the U.S. is abandoning the rules? Basically, without the being present at WHO or at Paris Agreement, I mean, the U.S. is losing even the right to say, to talk, discussion, to persuade others, or to present their opinions.
Well, first of all, let's make one thing clear. Those rules are made by the United States in a coordination with other countries. So it's not like the United States it's abide by rules that they're not participated in or particularly in charge of making those rules. So, however, it's the same United States that are dissatisfied with the current rules or by some of the conditions or terms that are now exist in those international organizations. Now it's the American people's choice, and particularly the Trump administration's choice, to detach itself to stop providing public goods in those global governance institutions. So again, I think that's Americans' conscious choice. It's not necessarily about the flaws of those international institutions and organizations, because we all know that there are flaws in those institutions. China also have problems with those institutions. However, all the countries need to accept that there are certain disadvantages by participating, but also there are advantages by participating in those international organizations, particularly the World Health Organization. No matter how you criticize it, it is an early warning system. It is a system for international cooperation during crisis. And I don't think the mishandling of COVID is a major flaw of that organization. Also, there are many other organizations that currently the United States are refusing to or trying to get out of because they think they're overpaying for those and taking more responsibility than taking advantage of those international organizations. So again, I think it's American people's choice. I can't say that it's a right or wrong choice. However, without being in those organizations, the United States also needs to accept the consequences, which is not being able to making future rules and also actively participating, also leading those organizations to counter and the international challenge that they were collectively facing for the future.
Okay.
Well, let me make something here very clear. The Paris Accords are not an organization. Okay, it's not an organization.
No, it's an agreement.
A previous government. Yes, an agreement. It's not an organization with respect to climate. And the United States, with all due respect, does not make the rules. Does not make the rules for WHO, did not make the accord, and so forth. Yes, it did participate. It was a signatory. We went into a disastrous deal with Iran, a previous government in the U.S. You're right. An election was held, and the current president, said the United States' participation in those organizations and its voice was either not heard or the government that acquiesced to those rules was mistaken. But at the core of this is the following. It doesn't matter about the rules if they're not being followed. And it doesn't matter what voices are being heard at either WHO or the Paris Peace Accords if a set of countries play by one set of rules and the others ignore it. So that is where the president has said repeatedly that we have been duped and where the U.S. is at a huge disadvantage. That is the problem. If those things can be remedied, I can assure you the United States would re-engage. The same thing happens with the UN's Human Rights Commission. It is a joke when you see the countries that are sitting in the Human Rights Commission that violate human rights.
Well,
when you have countries like Cuba on the Human Rights Commission, it doesn't matter. We have a voice.
Adolfo,
so long as that has no teeth.
Yeah, let me move down to Rina. Speak of that, kind of related in the sense, in essence, I would say, Donald Trump said in his speech that he wanted to be remembered as a peacemaker. And he did. I mean, he did, send people to the Middle East, for example, even before his inauguration, and made some progress, real progress. And he tried on the Ukraine crisis. At the same time, he also talked about taking back of the Panama Canal. How do you reconcile these, different claims here?
For me right now, in observing all these sort of quick actions and frankly very big promises by Trump, all I can say is I know what he's trying to do here, and that is really leave this legacy behind that is monumental. He knows that Biden has left the White House not on a high note. He's left the White House with a very different impression in the minds of millions of Americans who even voted for him in 2020. So what Trump wants to do to counteract that, as most American presidents want to do, is take swift action in areas that are memorable. Immigration is going to be the top area, but he's going to also have to tackle inflation. Now, on the subject of geopolitical tensions, as you just alluded to, he's got a tall order. The American people expect him to not just really get things done for us, but to also not insert ourselves in new conflicts split, to remove ourselves from current conflicts. And how he does them, I think if you look around, the average American quite doesn't care how he does it. Now, between Ukraine and Russia, this ongoing conflict of 3 years, what you hear are debates not just within the Republican Party, where it's split on having on giving support to Ukraine, continued now now we're looking at year 3, right? But what you're also seeing is this general sense of how much longer can we be a bank for disputes that are frankly about land and, yes, about sovereignty. Democracy matters, no doubt, but that heavy emphasis by Biden on democracy over and over again, I think sort of fell on deaf ears, because as you get this horrific imagery, we're so technologically connected now, right? We can get these real-time images out of Gaza. We can get a sense that Israel isn't listening to Biden, Netanyahu in particular, despite the Biden-Blinken duo's efforts. What Trump could do there is insert himself as that strongman. And so all of this is kind of right in line. In fact, it's quite disciplined message-wise, which has been particularly striking to me, because I've been obviously a critic of this now President Trump in the past. But what I'm most struck by is the fact that we have such a short-term memory as an electorate. One thing people are not giving him credit for, which I'm willing to do, is exactly this time last year, there were reports of then private citizen Trump, who hadn't even come close to winning the 2024 election. This time last year, Trump had been known to say to his friends and confidants while he sat in Mar-a-Lago that Benjamin Netanyahu should, quote unquote, knock this off. And I want to give credit where it's due, because I think if that was his sense back then, he wanted that, again, to end in Gaza. And what most Americans were frustrated by as we watched that horrific imagery of innocent men and women and children being killed indiscriminately in Gaza is the sense that why are we continuing to pour our money over to Israel when they have no respect for our president? So I want to give Trump that credit, because he said it so long ago that he wanted an end to this. And so the ceasefire deal, no surprise he's taking credit.
Yes, indeed, Adolfo. I mean, a lot of people would agree with Rina that President Trump, even before he takes office, he sent aid to the Middle East and helped reach the deal. That's really impressive. But still, at the same time, when he talked about taking back Panama Canal, changing the name of the Gulf of Mexico to Gulf of America, people are wondering, how do you describe that kind of a choice?
Well, a couple things. I agree with everything that Rina has actually said, so I'm not going to repeat it. I think that was well stated. The fact of the matter is, the country is today fatigued with what it saw for many, many decades, actually, as endless wars, or wars that were hard to explain. There is a curious twist to this. This incoming Secretary of State, Marco Rubio, has had a different record. So we might have a balance of course, the U.S. is a superpower and will remain engaged. But the focus is going to be a domestic agenda. I think, as Rina has said, I think the president's attitude is we need to resolve these things quickly. I think he will engage. He will be forceful presence, whether it's in Ukraine, which he said he was going to end the first day. He was asked about that yesterday, Ukraine-Russia conflict, and he said, "Give me another day, or I've only been there for only been here for half a day." So I think you'll see that emphasis on the U.S. engaged only when its national interests, direct national interests, are engaged. With respect to and the Gulf of Mexico, and this, I think this is, of course, very popular with conservatives. It's tied to the Panama Canal issues. Of course, that was a very controversial issue in the 1970s. Ronald Reagan, largely, one of the things he ran on was keeping the canal, or against the canal, when he ran in 1980, when the treaty was actually finished by that time. So that's been a sensitive point. I think he ties it when he sees interest for the U.S., as he articulated with respect to the canal, or Greenland, which has to do with, again, our competitors in the world, not our allies, our competitors that are engaged in activities, whether they be economic or military, in these areas that are our neighborhood of great concern. So you'll see that engagement there. But I do believe that the president's focus is absolutely going to be on domestic policy. And to that extent, with respect to Ukraine or other foreign aid that's been going, or certainly the attention of the United States to other places of the world. He made reference to North Carolina, a recent hurricane disaster, as an emphasis on our national priorities. And I think, of course, immigration is that as well. So that will be where the energy will be.
Right, but Zhao Hai, obviously, I mean, people overseas and beyond the U.S., the rest of the world would welcome the gesture of President Trump, to be a peacemaker, to avoid wars, potential wars, withdrawing the U.S. from any conflicts. I mean, that would be a huge contribution and a wonderful, let's say, legacy for President Trump.
Yeah, that will make President Trump a real exception since World War II, because every single American president start wars, not ending them. And President Trump in the last administration did start a war, and this administration, if he can end all those wars, that would be great. And I think we need to give credit when credit is due. And also on that particular issue of Russia-Ukraine, China is also actively trying to help to bring peace back to the region. President Xi just called President Trump, and also just a few hours ago, President Xi also called President Putin, and Putin also expressed the willingness to talk with the United States and try to bring a negotiation back on the table. So I think if we keep an optimistic view on this issue, then hopefully the war in Ukraine will end rather quickly, just like there's a deal already in the Middle East. Hopefully that will keep as well. However, on the issue that you just mentioned, it's quite confusing about what President Trump would do on the issue of Greenland, also the Panama Canal. Because if he really talk about sovereignty, that will be a slap on the face to President Biden and other establishment in Washington, D.C., because they always talk about rules-based international order. And if the United States use coercive power to grab the land in Greenland or part of the Panama Canal, then that will change fundamentally how the international system works and how international order will continue moving forward. However, if the United States is pursuing economic and other interests in those particular areas, that's understandable. But it really matters how Trump will pursue his goal.
Right. A follow-up for you, Zhao Hai. President Trump, as you said, did have a good phone call with President Xi. They talked about bilateral relationship, and of course, at least in the first day, people to say he didn't mention about the tariffs, possible tariff on the Chinese side. So do you see there's a possibility for the two sides to reach a deal on trade, on other issues, and then work together? As President Trump said that they can help a lot to end all the wars, to do a lot around the world, as long as the two countries join hands here.
I think that call and also Vice President Han Zheng's visit to the United States, participating in the inauguration of President Trump, is a very good sign that the two countries are moving in the right direction. At least the top leaders are talking with each other, and also President Trump is expressing interest to visit China within 100 days in office. President Biden failed to visit China and actually disrupted the tradition of American sitting president visiting China, and that's really bad. And I hope that President Trump would have a good start, and also both countries can have a deal or settle on some disputes, because we, as Vice President Han Zheng pointed out when he talked to G.D. Vance, the Vice President in the United States, that both countries share enormous common interest in this very complex world, with technological revolution, with the threat of climate change and more public health crisis. I think that we need these two, both big economies in the world, to work together, and also on geopolitical issues, both countries can also contribute to maintain peace in the world. So again, I think I applaud for President Trump's effort. And also, I think it's critically important that following that top leaders' directions, other departments, particularly Marco Rubio's State Department, could start moving forward and having contact with the Chinese side. During the Biden administration, at least almost 2 dozens of connections already established. Hopefully, those connections and communications will continue and deepen during the Trump administration.
Well, on that note, we come to the end of today's show. Many thanks to our guests. You can also watch us on the CGTN app on YouTube. I'm Xu Qinduo. Thanks for being with us. See you next time.